Mankind's conflicts of today are the product of a cultural conflicts in cultural history. To understand human behavior, we must look back as well as we can to ancient times to see as much as we can. A good deal of this planet was buried under many layers of ice, especially the northern hemisphere, for a long period of time. And during this long period of time, culture was primarily located in transoceanic or at least other maritime cultures, not land cultures. As far as we know, human culture, its progress, was determined by maritime culture, which in its navigation discovered the significance of astronomy, discovered its importance for man, and for navigation itself. And these were the leading cultures in the Great Ice Age period in particular. And then the ice began to recede about 20,000 years ago, and the rate of melting increased. Gradually, the oceans rose by about 400 feet, changing the definition of coastline, making India much smaller than it had been in an earlier period. The Mediterranean was opened up as no longer a lake-like formation, but became a sea, a salty sea. And then about 10,000 years ago, as the Mediterranean rose, it broke through the so-called Dardanelles Strait and transformed what we call the Black Sea lake, from a freshwater lake into a saltwater lake with a freshwater underbase. So in this process, these changes are going on. Man is reacting to these changes. Gradually, as the glaciation recedes, civilization moves into land. It moves along the coast first, as we see in the 4th and 3rd century BC in the Mediterranean region. It goes through various crises, but there's a gradual inland movement. First movement is along the coast, maritime culture. Secondly, it begins to move upriver in the major rivers, particularly the rivers that are now being flooded by the melting ice from the glaciation. And in this situation, something happens. You have a culture whose leading characteristic in this known period was that of a maritime culture, not an inland culture. The conflicts of the world today are approximately the echo of this long conflict between the idea of the internal development of national territories and cross-national territories, as typified by great transcontinental railway systems and by technological progress. And the other side, the idea of maintaining a maritime supremacy, a maritime financial supremacy over the world at large. It was an international financial group based on maritime power, which thought they could create a power dominating the world. The conflict in the Middle East is a part of a world conflict, not the other way around. Don't look at the Israeli-Arab conflict. Don't ignore it, but don't look at it. Because the conflict is not determined by the Israelis or Arabs. It's determined by international forces which look at this region how? As a crossover point between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. The relationship of Europe to Asia, the relationship of Europe to East Africa, and so forth. Therefore, what you're seeing is that. Now, go back and say, where did the British get this idea? As they did with Sykes-Picot. Where did they get the bright idea of keeping the Arab population and the Israeli, what became the Israeli population, at odds with each other permanently, killing each other over land that wasn't worth fighting over? To say, this is a disaster. What are these two groups of people going to do with this damn warfare? They're going to destroy each other. They're going to destroy civilization by spreading this disease. What are they fighting for? To kill somebody else? To eliminate somebody else? There is a solution in principle. And the solution is end this blasted imperialist system. And understand that we, as a people, must develop our spiritual culture that is the creative powers of mankind, to carry further the development of mankind from some brutish character by a campfire 1,000,000 years ago or so, into mankind as we desired that mankind should develop today. That's the issue. In the meantime, we will fight. We will do everything possible to try to get peace in this area because we want to stop the killing. But you have to understand that the problem comes not from these people, except that they're playing themselves for fools and fighting each other. They're both extremely poor. Do you know what the condition of the average Arab is in that region? Do you know what the condition of life is, the deteriorating condition of life of the Israeli? What the hell are they fighting about? Where's the benefit in the fighting? Well, somebody's playing them. Somebody's playing and orchestrating the situation. Who? How do the British come in on this? Well, go back, for example, to the time that Lord Shelburne, who was the boss of the British Empire, at that time was not the empire of the British monarchy. It was the empire of the British East India Company, which had private armies and private navies and private funds and a lot of drugs. What did we learn from that? Well, how did Shelburne come into power? How did he become this leader in February of 1763 of the British what became the British Empire, which was really the empire of the British East India Company, not the empire of the British monarchy. That came later with Victoria. It came because of the 7 Years' War. What was the 7 Years' War? The Anglo-Dutch interests, which were largely banking financial interests, orchestrated a period of warfare among the nations of continental Europe, back and forth, playing the very skilled military commander of Prussia, the Great, in perpetual warfare, which resulted in the ruin of the nations of continental Europe through mutual warfare and its effects, such that in February 1763, the British walked in and dictated a treaty called the Peace of Paris, which established the British East India Company as a private empire, which led later to the formation under Victoria of the so-called British Empire. Since that time, this group, which is not a group of people as such, I don't think of British bankers as people, because they don't act like people. They act like clever apes, but with the instincts of apes. That what was done in this whole period, especially in dealing with the Lincoln process, the Lincoln effect, and the 1873 effect, was not to engage a direct war against the United States, which they intended to destroy, but to subvert it, to neutralize the U.S. in its own development by various kinds of crises. But mainly was to destroy continental Europe, and to destroy it by warfare like the 7 Years' War in Europe. For example, shortly after 1890, when Bismarck was commenting on what had happened to him, he said, well, the purpose of this thing was to ruin continental Europe through a new 7 Years' War. Shelburne's conviction was, on the basis of the study of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, was that the way the British Empire should operate was the way it had operated in the 7 Years' War, and the way it was to operate in terms of the Napoleonic Wars, and so forth, was to get the fools to kill each other, to play one against the other. I'm angered at my own people, who, like fools, will kill each other over things that are not really worth fighting about, when there are all other solutions to the problems, and thus making themselves the common prey in their own fighting of each other of an empire. It's like the principle of the 7 Years' War. Get the other guys to kill each other, then you come in and take over the mess. That's the way the British Empire has always operated. Since the 1790s, the British Empire has been based on drugs. It's been the world's big drug trafficker. You want to ban drugs, you sort of have to put the Queen of England in a little cage, because she's shrinking now. The cage doesn't have to be too big. And in that case, what we should be fighting, we should not have troops in Afghanistan. We're stupid to have troops in Afghanistan. It's provocative. The British are sitting upon the area of Afghanistan in which the greatest drug production is occurring. What they have is slaves in there with the threat of a gun are producing opium at a low price, actually a slave price, for British consumption. The British then take this stuff and transport it out of Pakistan, out of Afghanistan, into Europe as the international drug trade, so that a farmer in Afghanistan, who in the British-controlled area, where British troops control the area, not the other part, are growing opium, and they're getting maybe a few $100s worth for a year's crop. When that year's crop hits the European market, it's in millions of dollars. The entire world economy, largely controlled by the British, by George Soros, for example, who's a British agent, Malloch Brown of the British Colonial Office, are the biggest drug runners in the world today. And they destroy people, as the way that China was destroyed in the 19th century by the drug running. If the place to hit the drug traffic is not in the consumption within the country or the growth in the country, the place to hit the drug traffic is the international trade. The Taliban factor is being used by the British, operating from their base in the vicinity of Afghanistan, to operate the whole operation. When we had the death of McKinley, the assassination of McKinley, and the introduction of British puppets, such as Teddy Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, Coolidge, and so forth, as presidents, to what that signified. And we became a tool of the British imperial policy, rather than representing our own interests or representing what we should represent in our dedication to the establishment of a system of republics throughout the planet. What the world as it existed on April 12th of 1945, when Roosevelt died, and the day after, on the April 13th, when Truman became president, were two entirely different worlds. And I know, I was in military service abroad during that transition period. I was in India and Burma. When I came back in the late spring of 1946, after a beautiful experience with the attempt of India to achieve its independence, the United States had changed. It was no more the United States of Franklin Roosevelt. The same fascist crowd that Roosevelt had kept under control while he was president was back in power under a puppet called Harry Truman. The key thing I concentrate upon is the only way we can save this planet, because the entire planet's going into a dark age. Now you have China, 1.4 billion people. India, 1.1. Russia is not a populous nation, but has tremendous territory with tremendous raw materials development and also cultural skills. If you can put these together with the United States in an effort to make a new initiative in terms of an international credit system, we can save the situation. It's clear to me we can save it right now.